Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation. My name is Stacy Black and today I will be going over Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation. So we're first going to go over a little bit of background about who he is, and then we're going to break down each one of the steps individually and see how it all comes together for the evaluation process. So let's go ahead and get started here. Alright, so Donald Kirkpatrick, he was a professor at the University of Wisconsin and past president of the American Association for Training and Development. And he first published his 4 levels of training evaluation model in 1959 in the U.S. Training and Development Journal. The model was updated in 1975 and again in 1994. When he published his best-known work, evaluating training programs. Here is the model itself. So it is 4 levels, and each one is broken down to basically cover what to do as far as after a training that you would do in either a business setting or educational setting. So to start at the very bottom, we have the reaction level. And to that level, you want to pretty much figure out how the reaction is from your participants or your trainees based on the training that you have provided to them. And then the second level is going to be the learning level, and this is pretty much a test on how well they were evaluated on how you provided the training. The next level is the behavior level, and here you want to see how your trainees or employers or the applicants that were in the training, how they have pretty much applied the training that you have provided over amount of time. And then we have the results level, which is basically the outcome of what you have wanted them to learn and gain over a period of time after the training has been completed. The Kirkpatrick's model is probably the best known model for analyzing and evaluating the results of a training in educational programs. It takes into account any style of training, both informal and formal, to determine aptitude based on the levels. So now we're going to break down each one of those levels. Okay, so our first level is going to be our reaction level. This level measures how your trainees reacted to the training. Obviously, you want them to feel that the training was a valuable experience, and you want them to feel good about various components of the training, such as the instructor, the topic that was presented, the materials provided, the presentation as a whole, and where the presentation was held. It's very important to measure the reaction because it helps you understand how well the training was received by your audience. It also helps you improve the training for future trainees, including identifying important areas or topics that you have missed from the previous training. Here are some questions that you can ask your trainees as far as identifying the reaction that they have based on the training that was just provided to them. So some of the questions include, like I mentioned in the last slide, as far as the venue and the style of the presentation, how do they feel about what they were presented with, how accommodating was the instructor for their personal learning styles, what were some of the biggest strengths of the training and some of the weaknesses. In addition to those questions, you can also do a satisfaction survey, such as a Survey Monkey. I know that I use those all the time. I'm sure that we've all used those in class at one point of time, or a questionnaire, or like how we do right after someone has presented, we will give a questionnaire based on how well we rate the presentation or the training that was just provided. Along with those options, you can also simply watch the body language of the trainees as you're presenting the presentation. Are they looking engaged? Are they, in their phone, or are they half asleep? Like, these are signs that you can pretty much tell how the training is going based on simply the body language. Another way to do this is also by verbal feedback about the experience that the trainees have have had during the course of the presentation or the training. Once you have gathered the information, you want to look at it very carefully, and then pretty much based on that feedback, you can then make adjustments to your presentation moving forward. Now we're going to move on to level 2, which is our learning level. And in this level, you are basically testing how much your trainees have learned as a result of the training that was just provided. And here, when you plan your training session, you hopefully started with a list of goals or learning objectives. And these should be the starting point for your measurement. Keep in mind that you can measure learning in different ways depending on these objectives. It is important to measure this because knowing what your trainees are learning and what they aren't learning will improve future trainings that you do for your next set of people that you are doing the training for. To measure learning, you want to start by identifying what you want to evaluate. These things could be changes in knowledge, skills, or attitudes. It's often helpful to measure these areas both before and after the training. So before training begins, test your trainees to determine their knowledge, their skill levels, and their attitudes. Once the training is finished, test your trainees a second time to measure what they have learned, or measure learning with interviews or verbal assessments. Now we're going to move on to level 3, which is behavior. At this level, you evaluate how far your trainees have changed their behavior based on the training that they received. Specifically, this looks at how trainees apply the information. It is important to realize that behavior can only change if conditions are favorable, and it may take months on end to evaluate. For instance, imagine you skip measurements at the first 2 Kirkpatricks levels, which is the reaction level and the learning level. When you are looking at your group's behavior, you determine that no behavior change has taken place. Therefore, you assume that your trainees haven't learned anything and that the training was ineffective. However, just because behavior hasn't changed, it doesn't mean that the trainees haven't learned anything. Perhaps their boss won't let them apply their new knowledge, or maybe they've learned everything that you taught and they have no desire to apply the knowledge themselves. So one of the best ways to measure behavior is to conduct observations and interviews over time. Also, keep in mind that behavior will only change if conditions are favorable. For instance, effective learning could have taken place in the training session, but if the overall organizational culture isn't set up for any behavior changes, the trainees might not be able to apply what they have learned. Additionally, trainees may not receive support, recognition, or reward for their behavior change from their boss. So over time, they disregard the skills or knowledge that they have learned and go back to their old behaviors. So now that we have started from our reaction to our learning to our behavior, you then want to get to the results of the training. And at this level, you analyze the final results of your training. This includes outcomes that you and your organization have determined to be good for business, good for the employees, and good for the bottom line of what you're trying to achieve. So here we have a snapshot of some ways of how to measure the results based on what you provided your training on. So some of them can be an increase in employee retention or production, higher morale, reduced waste, higher quality ratings, increased customer satisfaction, and fewer staff complaints. The biggest challenge in identifying which outcomes are beneficial and coming up with an effective way to measure these outcomes over time. So when you're doing your level 3, which is the behavior, and level 4, it will take months at a time to gather information to really figure out if the training was beneficial. Now that we have went through all of our levels, I did provide some considerations for you if you were to use this type of model when when trying to evaluate a training or a workshop that you have presented to a group of trainees at your job or wherever you are. Although Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of training is the most popular and widely used model, there are a number of considerations that need to be taken into account when using the model. One of the issues that it can be time consuming and expensive to use when you are approaching that level 3 and level 4 of the model. So it's not practical for all organizations or situations. The model also assumes that each level's importance is greater than the last level and that all levels are linked. For instance, it applies that reaction is less important than results and that reactions must be positive for learning to take place. In actuality, this may not be the case. Most importantly, organizations change all the time. So behaviors and results, can be altered based on the changes of the organization. Additionally, the Kirkpatrick's model is great for evaluating training in a scientific way. However, there are many variables that can be changing in a fast-changing organization. So it has its plus and minuses when it comes to the Kirkpatrick's way of evaluating training. So when you are using this models, you definitely want to take these considerations into mind and to really see if you want to go that long-term time frame of gathering those final results. So to wrap up here for the presentation, I did want to just retouch back on each of the levels. So we have one, the reaction, how did the learners or the trainees feel about their experience. Then we have the learning, basically, which is before and after the training. You want to evaluate how much knowledge has increased based on what you have presented. Then we have the behavior, which can span over a couple of months as far as gathering that information. And you want to do that with, weekly or bi-weekly check-ins with the employees or their participants to figure out if their behavior has altered and then their conditions of their work environment, if that may take into effect of the behavior. And then the last one is the results, and that's concrete evidence of how well your training has impacted the trainees. Here are the list of the discussion questions that I have provided based on the presentation, and they are available on the website, so you guys can see that there, and feel free to answer one or two or all of them if you like. And to move forward, we do have my references that I use for this presentation. If you want me to send you the link for them, I definitely can do that. And just thank you all for listening tonight. I do appreciate you all taking the time to listen to my presentation on the Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation, and I hope that you gained something during this time. And thank you all.